Yes.
Good. Okay. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 15th, 2022 Mount Lebanon Planning Board meeting. We'll have a call to order, a roll call. Our board members, Rebecca Griffith.
Here.
Dave Hornacek.
Here.
Clint Rounsful.
Here.
John Schrott.
Here.
Andrew George here. Municipal staff, Dan Diceroff.
Here.
Ian McMeans, our planner.
Here.
Greg Wharton, our urban planning and sustainability coordinator. And our liaison, Steve Silverman.
He was not able to attend tonight.
Okay, and Marilyn Oberst Horner.
She was also not able to attend. She had a family thing. I'm not sure if someone from the Historic Preservation Board is online or not. I see a couple of people joining us online, so I'm not sure if any of them are from the Historic Board or not.
Okay. The planning board will accept public comments with each agenda item. Please note the repetition of comments made by previous speakers is not necessary for them to be considered. If a group of residents shares an opinion, we suggest you select a spokesperson. Public comments is not the appropriate time for prolonged debate or for personal comments about or questions directed to fellow residents, the board members, municipal staff, or any developer. In consideration of everyone's time, we encourage residents making public comment to refrain from repeating comments made by previous speakers. For Zoom participants, if you wish to comment during public comment agenda items, use the raise hand function. During the public comment agenda item, the chair will recognize you. When recognized, be sure to unmute your line and announce your name and address for the record. If you have multiple or complicated comments, you are welcome to submit them to us in writing. We ask you to hold your remarks to 5 minutes and we'll let you know when your time is up. We appreciate your efforts to be respectful and ask that the audience refrain from any behavior that is disruptive or might intimidate free speech. With that, we'll have our meeting minutes. Our first agenda item, do we have an approval of minutes from the October 18th, 2022 meeting?
Yeah, I, Clint Rounce, will make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of the October 18th, 2022 planning board meeting.
This is Dave Hornacek. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we have no old business. Moving on to new business. We have a request for preliminary approval and recommendation for final approval of a lot consolidation plan. Roger DeLonga is the owner of the property situated at 810 and 820 Rob Hollow Road. Mr. DeLonga is proposing a consolidation of the two lots into approximately 0.9 acres total, in order to raise the residential structure at 820 Rob Hollow and to keep the existing accessory garage structure. Do we have any comments from the engineer?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I do have a letter dated November 10th, 2022 regarding the DeLonga consolidation plan. We have reviewed the plan and the application. This time it's a recommendation for final approval from the planning board is being sought. The following are comments with respect to chapter 16 and 20 of the Mount Lebanon Code. The single family detached dwellings are used by right in the zoning district. The structure on parcel 2 is noted to be raised within 1 year of the acceptance of the plan. There's some information regarding the preliminary application content, such as evidence of the ownership. The site location map needs corrected. The building setback lines need to be shown on the plan, and the buildings need to be dimensionally tied to the property line. We also have some comments related to the Rob Hollow being a state road, and a notation that they need to put on the plan related to the state highway occupancy permit. Finally, our comment is that they appear to be dedicating some right-of-way along Rob Hollow Road. That would have to be approved by PennDOT. It's not necessary as a part of our regulations. So these are all relatively minor comments that can be addressed very easily before this can move on if the planning board wants to decide to move it on tonight.
Is anybody here representing the property? No? Okay. I guess, does anybody have any questions?
I just add a note to the approval to kind of echo what Dan said about the PennDOT permit, just to say that all required permits, will be necessary for final approval.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would someone like to make a motion?
John Schrott. I move to grant preliminary approval and recommend final approval to the DeLongo plan of lots consolidation, contingent upon the applicant addressing the comments of the engineer's review letter dated November 10th, 2022, and contingent upon delivery of the appropriate permits.
This is Rebecca Griffith. I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We'll move on to our comprehensive plan update. Discussion of the comprehensive plan update. Consultants from Pashek, MTR, and the municipal planner will provide an update on the progress of the comprehensive plan.
Do you want to run it or do you want me to run it? It's up there.
If you wouldn't mind.
Sure, I can do that.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for your time. It's nice to see you all again. I'm Jenny Easton with Pashek MTR. This is Green Mass Archer here with WSP, part of the project team. When we last saw you in June, we were at the height of excitement for Mega Comp Plan Day, our project kickoff, the formal kickoff for the comprehensive plan. So we're here this evening to provide an update on how the project has developed since and discuss where it heads next. So this evening, we'd like to provide kind of an overview of what's happened since kickoff during the explore phase of the plan. The summer and early fall, we devoted primarily to engagement, casting a wide net, making the project known and listening to everybody who could possibly be interested in helping us craft a shared vision for the community for the next 10 years. We have some preliminary results to share from those efforts, and we think it's really important that those results meaningfully inform what we do next. We proposed at the beginning of this process, a process that would be intentionally flexible. We wanted to build our phase 2 and 3 activities around what we learned in phase 1 and target our resources, time, and expertise toward the issues that are rising to the surface as being really important to people for the next plan. So here is a high-level project timeline, just to give you a sense of where we are along the way. We are here poised to transition from phase 1, the explore phase, to phase 2, test. In phase 2, we start reflecting what we heard in phase 1 back to the community and exploring potential policies, action steps, and recommendations. In phase 2, we will activate subject matter experts, bring together some people around the community with specific local perspective, bring in some of the regional stakeholders, other agencies that will inform the recommendations and strategies that come out of the plan. Finally, that third phase, the build phase, involves finalizing and presenting recommendations and then building coalition and capacity to see them carried out. I want to emphasize that engagement activities continue throughout the entire process. There are so many cool things we have yet to do. In the test phase in particular, you'll see experimental type things happening. You may see, for instance, a pop-up bark park to explore. You know, we've had a lot of conversations so far about where residents would like to see something like that. We could test maybe a one-day project to see what that would look like. Or a tactical bike lane as part of an event, or a larger installation to see how things work, get resident feedback, and get information from the public that will inform how and whether these things take shape in the plan. So I would like to focus our time this evening primarily on discussion, but I do want to provide a quick overview of what we've been up to during the phase 1 outreach. So I'd like to move through these slides at breakneck speed, but please feel free to jump in with questions or comments as we go along. We appeared at a variety of community events with the goal of meeting people where they are. So encountering those who might not read the magazine or follow municipal social media or listen to the new podcast. Just people who are out enjoying everything Mount Lebanon has to offer. So this was at July 4th, Community Day. A hot day, a lot of people there. So we handed out project information cards promoting our first survey, which was launched right at the beginning of the project with a QR code for that, and asked people to participate in this big idea activity, to write down one big idea for the long-term future of the community, share it with us, and we have all those photos chronicled on the website. We were also First Friday doing the same thing, and at the car cruise this summer, the street closure was the perfect environment for us to bring out our roving bike, which is kind of a spectacle. It's a bike with a big banner and kind of a kit for engagement on the back. So people see it and they're curious what it's about. We have the QR code linking to the website, or I'm sorry, the initial survey at that time. And then continued that big idea activity, interacted with a lot of folks that way. That's it.
So the bullet points are the major big ideas that came out at each of those events.
Yes.
Okay.
So to the extent there were things we were hearing more often, that's what's included in the bullet points. Specific activities are maybe our primary takeaways, I would say. In August, we launched ascendlebo.com, the project website, along with the second survey interactive map, and we were promoting that very heavily. So at the homecoming game versus Upper St. Clair, we had, I think, a lot of high energy with some young ambassadors. The McMeans family assisted us in persuading football game goers to participate. Greg was up in the stands talking to the student section. So we distributed a lot of the project cards. I think got the word out about the project to a lot of people who had not heard about it at that point, and then saw a bump in survey responses afterward. We were then at the very soggy artist market. That's the foot of the roving engagement bike you see there. The few people who braved the rain and made it out to this event, I think pretty universally said that they really appreciate local events and having a variety of reasons to gather and spend time with people in the community. And most recently at the Halloween tent, trunks, and treats events, we hit attendees. There were many, many people there with kind of a 1-2 punch. So the bowl of candy lured the small children over, and then we could engage their parents in conversation about our planning activities. So across all of these events, the themes we heard were generally pretty similar. The conversations took the same shape. People are very proud of this community, have great aspirations for its future, and lots of suggestions about what that should look like. Also during phase 1, we initiated some key person interviews. The questions for these folks listed there at this point are generally pretty broad. We're asking what should be on the radar of this planning process, what has changed during the last 10 years, looking forward, what's going to be important for this plan to address. The interviews are also an opportunity to capture perspectives we might miss otherwise in the surveys, or specific perspectives that should inform the planning process. We are paying close attention to engaging youth, because that's a segment that we know we're drastically underrepresenting in survey results, which is pretty typical among surveys and communities everywhere. So we met with the junior commissioners and board members. They were fantastic, and they have generously agreed to help us conduct some outreach activities at the high school and help us kind of position our engagement to be more suitable for that crowd. We had great turnout a few weeks ago at our first meeting about the comprehensive plan with members of the community's advisory boards, as well as some key partner agencies. This was a way for us to open up lines of communications with appointed liaisons to each of these many groups, so that they are receiving updates from us on a regular basis about what's happening with the comprehensive plan, and they're sharing with us what the priorities of their groups and agencies are for the process to consider. We want to keep them plugged in. We'd like to keep information flowing both ways, and we'll meet with them at project milestones as they continue. So with regard to the results, I want to emphasize we're building a tapestry of engagement. So what follows are quantitative results from the 2 surveys and the interactive map. It's important to remember that while that is a really important and large data set, it is not a random sample. Not literally a popular vote on any of the questions that it includes, not a referendum, but a source of direction for us and context that's colored by the thousands of comments that we were also privileged to receive. So the interactive map on ascendlebo.com. I want to note the website will continue to be a clearinghouse for information 2 ways throughout the project. So we'll update it next with the results of all of these outreach efforts. But this was our first interactive map activity, offering people the opportunity to submit some site-specific ideas on the categories you see there at the right. The categories came from the results of the first survey, the topics, areas of interest that seem to be pretty popular and lent themselves to marking on a map. So there are 830 points there. Walking routes were the most popular category, I think representing about a third of all of the comments we received. People are able to upvote and downvote one another's points and offer discussion. So there are discussion threads on some of the more controversial points made there. We have 2 community surveys. The initial survey was open during the early summer. It had 2 pretty basic questions. What do you like most about the community? And what would you like to see change? They were broad and open-ended. We didn't want to put a lot of boundaries on the things people were suggesting, and we wanted to hear from the public, maybe in the purest form, what they'd like to see happen. So that informed our more in-depth survey that was open from August. It is still open. It will be open through the end of November. This was based on the results of the first survey, the topics that were rising to the surface. And in the second survey, we wanted to test some values, sentiments, and appetite for the tougher choices that some of these issues involve. So the initial survey received 958 responses, almost all of which were from residents. 2/3 were from property owners. The second survey, currently still open, has 1,645 responses to date. And there we are capturing certainly still a lot of residents and property owners, but a larger share of people who work in Mount Lebanon and people who don't own property here. So perhaps there we're capturing renters, people who travel to the community or visit here for work or other reasons, which is an important segment as well. Responses, the distribution across wards, we thought was pretty great. No obvious gaps there, especially in the second survey. It's remarkably even. Age, again, we see youth drastically underrepresented. So we'll have to focus our efforts on finding ways to connect with that cohort.
Is that typical in other communities?
Absolutely. It's really difficult. I'm not sure precisely why. Perhaps our young ambassadors will help us sort that out. Whether it's in terms of messaging and convincing them of the importance of the survey, or simply that it feels like another homework task, I'm not sure, but yes, quite typical.
One of the things that we've talked about too is that as we get in, we had kind of broken the project into the explore, test, and build phases. And when you're in the explore phase, sometimes it's hard to ask, the 17 and younger crowd, like, where do you want your community to be in 10 years? And they're like, 10 years ago, I was 7 years old. I'm thinking 10 years into the future is really difficult. But when we get into like the test phase and you start to ask questions of like, do you like this? Yes or no? That becomes a potentially easier way to engage that group. So we have some ideas there. The one thing that is a really big positive, I think, that I should note on this age cohort slide is that when we did the Parks Master Plan last year, the responses from the 65 and older group was about like 8 to 9% of total responses. In both of our comprehensive plan surveys, it's been in the 20% range, which is much closer to our census demographics, which I think is 20 to 22%, give or take, of our population is 65 and older. So I was very encouraged by the way we were able to reach that cohort, with these surveys for this project.
So this was a pretty important question. We asked folks which of these issues should be a high priority for Mount Lebanon to address during the next 10 years. And again, those topics came out of the first survey, the issues that were mentioned most often and that rose to the surface that people were talking about. We asked respondents to select their top 3 priorities, and these are the results. So the most commonly selected issue was recreation and park facilities. We interpret that as a mandate for the municipality to continue funding these amenities, implementing the parks plan. This is something that's really important to people about this community. You then see safe routes for, my font is even smaller than it appears on the screen. Safe streets for pedestrians and cyclists.
Strengthening local business districts, and then cost of taxes and services.
Excellent.
It's bigger on my screen, so I'm happy to help.
Yes, I appreciate that. Mobility is coming through loud and clear as an important priority for this plan to address. You see that in the interactive map and then in this ranking. With regard to strengthening local business districts, we know that's a treasured component of Mount Lebanon life. People really appreciate having those districts walkable and kind of the character and the experiences they can have there. In the comments, if you dig down into what people are saying about them, they'd like to make them even more vibrant with a variety of amenities, and a lot of folks would like to see a grocery store uptown. So on this set of questions, we were testing values and priorities. So on the Likert scale, from strongly agree to strongly disagree, where does your sentiment fall for each of these statements? So the statements, again, are testing themes and ideas that came out of the first survey, popular sentiments that were shared. So we've ranked these on the slides from most popular to least popular, simply based on the number of people who marked agree or strongly agree. So there are other ways to average these or weight these, but we thought this was a pretty fair way just to give you a sense of how these things rated. So the most popular idea by that metric would be that future development or redevelopment should respect Mount Lebanon's historic architectural character. Very low disagreement with that sentiment. You see that the following one, with a little more sentiment on the strongly disagree. As a community, Mount Lebanon has a responsibility to take actions within its control to address climate mitigation, such as those that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Still very popular. Moving on, I would say there is general agreement with the sentiment Mount Lebanon should offer a diverse range of housing options for people at all stages of their lives. Then slightly more controversial, every home in Mount Lebanon should be within a 20-minute walk, bike ride, or transit ride of daily destinations such as grocery stores, parks, schools, and services. Then Mount Lebanon should be the standard bearer among local communities on sustainability, leading innovation, and progress toward ecological integrity and community resilience. Still trending generally popular. Less strongly supported than the similar question about age and life stages was people of all income levels should be able to find a place to live in Mount Lebanon. At this question at its core, I think, is about whether Mount Lebanon is an exclusive community or an inclusive community and what that means to people. Next would be the dog park question, somewhat divisive. I think in the comments, you'll see that some people who want a dog park really want a dog park. And others are concerned about the negative externalities of having a dog park in their neighborhood.
One other thing, if we can just back up for a second, but I'll mention about the income levels. One of the things we heard a lot of in the first survey when we did, just that, you know, what do you like about Mount Lebanon and what would you change, was there was a lot of comments about the availability, or I should say lack of availability of senior housing and the ability to age in place. So that was one of the things that kind of informed some of these questions on, you know, people at all stages in their lives should be able to find a place in Mount Lebanon, people at different income levels, because we did hear some comments about, you know, people on fixed incomes, things like that, as well as a lot of comments, you know, relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that, you know, people said, you know, hey, I wish we had more economic diversity in the community as well. So a lot of those, you know, comments that we got in the first survey informed some of these more detailed questions in the second survey.
So the question regarding, or the statement, I should say, reconfiguring our streets to increase safety and comfort for cyclists is important, even if it requires the conversion of some streets to one-way traffic only. We wanted to ask this in terms of trade-off. So we know, of course, that build out of a bike network here faces some serious challenges. So we're testing attitudes about maybe personal inconvenience versus greater good, or what the tolerance level is for reconfiguring streets. I think this maybe the question where we received the most strongly disagree responses, but also some strongly agree. So finally, the least popular idea on this list, any redevelopment of a residential site in Mount Lebanon should result in an equal or greater number of housing units than were there previously. So we're wondering if perhaps the perception here was that this question was about intensifying density everywhere and whether that is appropriate. What we're really getting at here is limiting losses to the total housing inventory overall. But it's an interesting result.
It is, yes. Yeah, this question actually came from, I think, conversations that the planning board had about projects actually similar to the one that we had on the agenda tonight, where, you know, you have two residential properties and the property owner wants to tear down one of them in order to either put an addition on their existing house or something like that, that the planning board in the past had expressed concerns about losing housing stock since we don't have a lot of new housing stock coming to the community. But I think Jenny's right also that from the comments we got in the surveys, I think people kind of interpreted this question to mean, you know, are you going to suddenly start putting, you know, apartment buildings in residential districts and things like that. So I think the intent we had when we asked this question may not have been exactly how it was interpreted, but it's still, I think, an interesting response that, you know, people like their neighborhoods the way they are for the most part.
I think it's a fair interpretation. Yeah. We asked a couple more sidewalk questions, sensing early on that this topic will be very important to this plan. I think it's worth noting, of course, that 84% of respondents thought it would be moderately or extremely important during the next 10 years to close gaps in the sidewalk network. There's a lot of pride in this being a walking community that's really commonly mentioned, both at the in-person events and the survey results. And people discussed ways the improvements could provide access, improve quality of life, and allow people to make different choices, choose different modes, maybe walk to the store, walk kids to school instead of dropping them off.
This one was interesting too, because when we did the initial survey, we heard a lot of people said that walkability is one of the things they like most about Mount Lebanon. But then in the second question of what would you change, it was always, I love the walkability, but we need more sidewalks. We want to expand the sidewalk network. So that was, you know, kind of what led to these questions in the second survey.
So here we have a longitudinal comparison. We asked the same question in 2012, and for this planning effort, what influenced your decision to live in Mount Lebanon? So I would say these results are fairly consistent. You see kind of the same things across the board. Now we see mentioned the family-friendly quality of the municipality, and specifically mention of it being in a place that's easy to walk or bike, things that did not come through 10 years ago. We asked in both years, how has the community changed since you have lived or worked here? The same options were available in both surveys. So again, I think generally this is pretty consistent, though you see some shift into the less desirable category. We do have tons and tons of comments explaining these classifications and the reasoning people offered for their selection on this question. We asked a question about work sites, and the result I think is interesting. 35% of people who work in Mount Lebanon work from home regularly. So that has a lot of planning implications that will carry forward into our next phase. Also kind of interesting, we asked for people's place of residence prior to moving here, if they live here. And only 9% have always been here, or from here. Where sometimes at meetings you get the sense that everybody has always lived here. You do have a lot of in-migration from different areas of the county, state, and other areas of the country.
I think the interesting thing for me on this one, I know that the planning board had been very interested in this work from home question when we were first getting into the process, saying, you know, how is this plan going to help shape our community over the next decade as we start to see, you know, more people work from home, that we're not just, you know, the bedroom community that people live here and go to work downtown, that more people are here during the day because they're working from home. And I think that 35% number is very interesting. The other one I found interesting was, you know, looking at the percentages on the pie chart, that people move here from either in Allegheny County or a different state altogether. So that's kind of where our draws are coming from. And then the people who have always lived here versus a different Pennsylvania county are relatively equal at 9 and 10%. But I think that, you know, seeing where our draws are coming from is we have draw kind of very locally within Allegheny County, and then nationally, you know, 32% the respondents said they lived in a different state before moving here.
Yeah, I just noticed we flipped these labels. I'll fix that. Okay, so across all sources, meaning interviews, as well as the conversations we had over the summer at all of these community events, we see these themes rising to the surface. So these are things we kick around in phase 2. We figure out where we focus our efforts, where the municipality can move the needle during the next 10 years, and in what ways it's important for people to see change or progress on some of these issues. So my first question, I think, for you would be whether anything surprised you coming out of the results.
I'm surprised there's not more people that are from Mount Lebanon here, because it seems like just in my interactions that people are from here. That's surprising.
And I think as we were going through, so we basically gave the same presentation to the group of the liaisons from the other boards and authorities as well. I think one of the people there commented, you know, I wonder if some of those people who responded like grew up in Mount Lebanon, but lived somewhere else and then came back. But we didn't really have a way to capture that.
The nuance of that.
The nuance, of, you know, someone grew up here and then moved away for a little while and then moved back, but you know, but nevertheless, I agree. I thought that was a really fascinating response.
Any ideas on the enhancing business districts? Like, what would that entail? Is that creating new ones, enhancing current ones, or like how? I'd be curious how you dive deeper into that to get more information, or whatever your strategies are around that.
Yeah, I mean, the sentiments came through in the comments. We offered the option to submit comments in response to, I think, almost all of these questions. So we did receive a lot, and we can pull out ones related specifically to people who answered that question, that was a priority. My sense is that it's a priority for enhancing existing business districts. Is that you think?
Yes.
That people perceive various opportunities or ways they could be improved. So you'll hear mention of parking or a desire to attract certain types of businesses. To improve walkability, there are complaints, of course, about the construction.
Yeah.
That was a popular theme.
It's very popular. It was interesting that on the business district question, I think we got about an equal number of people that said you should just give free parking in your business districts and you need to enforce the parking more in your business districts. So, you know, those are kind of equally weighted, I think, in the responses we got. We did get some suggestions for specific types of businesses that people wanted to see. I know a grocery store is a very popular one that people mentioned. There was a couple other you know, items too that people mentioned that they wanted to see. And I think that's one of the things that as we get into the you know, like the test and the build phase of the project, that's something we can test is like, what do you actually mean by that? Yes. What do you want in your business districts? And it's interesting too, a lot of the comments mentioned, you know, the two business districts that, you know, Uptown and Beverly Road. And we actually have a third one with Castle Shannon Boulevard that kind of gets forgotten about. So, you know, maybe that kind of works its way into the future planning of how do we highlight that as kind of our third business district,
Which is maybe the most diverse, I think, out of the other two.
Yeah.
Which are mostly restaurants.
Yeah.
The comment you had about the future development or redevelopment should reflect the historic character. Was there any commentary on that? Like what people are looking for? Because I know that comes up with what's in the planning guidelines, which is fairly limited as far as what we can say. So I just wondered kind of how people elaborated on that, what they were expecting to get out of that.
I think there was a lot of,
since it was the top issue, it's like they could agree on.
Yeah, there was a lot in the initial survey when we asked what you like about Mount Lebanon, that people talked about the historic character, the, you know, the tree-lined streets, the you know, just sort of the nature of our community neighborhoods that people liked and really didn't want to see that disrupted. And so I think that kind of led to the question in the second survey and you know, got a resounding response. So you know, maybe at its core, a comprehensive plan is a land use plan. And the compendium piece to any comp plan is usually an update to the zoning ordinance. So, you know, I think as we get further into the process, maybe we start to look at, you know, what we can do from a zoning standpoint to encourage, you know, because right now we have the design guidelines and I think there's 7 and you have to meet 4 or 5 of them kind of, you know, checking boxes, but there may be other things we can do as far as, you know, from a material standpoint to kind of match the, you know, historic character, without pigeonholing people too much into saying like, you have to use these materials, still giving them options, but saying, you know, trying to get them to match more closely. Because right now, a lot of the things they have to do is kind of matching the scale of density within, you know, you can't put a McMansion next to a ranch house, and you can't put a tiny house in a neighborhood with larger houses, that we have sort of scale requirements, but maybe we start to look more at materials or something like that.
Or even the richness of them, like that they need to be on multiple sides or something like that.
Yeah.
Rather than pigeonholing into a style or
Mhm.
something like that. It just seems like maybe that could be, considering that it came up as such a topic that
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, I recall that in at least a couple of the interviews, there was discussion of kind of the architectural appearance and quality of the tradition here in Mount Lebanon that seems to be pretty well acknowledged. So one interviewee suggested that where there are opportunities to increase density, particularly along transit accessible areas, that density respect or take into account the architectural character of the neighborhoods nearby.
So I'm interested in the difference in responses to the question about, you know, every home should be within a 20-minute walk, bike, or transit ride. But then when you ask, do you want to adjust your street to make it more bike friendly? It's strongly disagreed.
Yes.
So how do you deal with those different opinions?
It's tough in conducting these surveys. We want to introduce a sense of reality and trade-offs and costs while we are testing desires and ambition for things that are for the general good that people seem really excited about. So it seems that on this topic and maybe some others, there is general agreement that that kind of benefit, like having easy access or a walkable, bikeable route to a destination, sounds like a great idea. The practical reality is less appealing. So that's something I think that we focus on in test phase, kind of, okay, what are the priority routes? And then on those specific routes, what are the challenges? What are the realities? And what's kind of the community consensus on what's reasonable for those routes?
I think one of the interesting things too, to supplement what Jenny said, this is where sort of the survey data and the map go hand in hand. That if you look at the mapping tool, where a lot of people have, you know, dropped the little bike icon and said, these are the places where I'd like bike routes to be. A lot of them are on kind of the bigger state and county roads, you know, Washington Road, Bower Hill Road, Cochrane Road, the main thoroughfares, basically. So I think when you ask the question about, or when we ask the question about, you know, converting residential streets to one way, people are like, whoa, I like my residential street. I like the convenience of getting in and out of my house, but I would like bike lanes on the larger thoroughfare. So I think that's kind of where some of the divide comes in, is that when people think about bike lanes, they think about it on the bigger areas, not necessarily thinking about the potential impact locally to their street. And, you know, if you, the board knows this, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you know, if you look at a map of Mount Lebanon, you can kind of tell when the neighborhoods were developed, that the ones that were developed before automobiles came into vogue, when we were a streetcar neighborhood, have much more of your traditional street grid kind of in the northern half of the community. And then, you know, the southern half of the community is much more kind of these long winding roads that kind of match the topography. But some of those are a little bit more, you know, would be more difficult to convert to one way, because that'd be a long loop to take around versus a, you know, traditional street grid up in the northern half of the community, that might be easier in, you know, smaller one block segments. Absolutely.
You know, you know, I think what the one-way street bicycling question does sort of test people's limits. In my mind, that's one of the most extreme things you would do in implementing. So it's not really about that particular scenario. And you know, we don't know until we look at the individual street whether that is the solution we need if one is put right there. But now we know that there is an overall willingness to look at this issue, and also a need to do so sensitively to, you know, people's individual street use and needs. Ultimately, the comp plan is not going to say X street gets bike lane, X street gets a sidewalk. But it's going to recommend things like carry out an active transportation plan in order to define those. You know, commission tomorrow or next week is reviewing a complete streets policy. Are they voting?
I don't know if they're voting or not. They might be actually. It's getting close. Yes.
But they're in the process of developing a complete streets policy, which is another high level piece to go together with the comp plan and then really get figured out in that active transportation plan. How you do the sidewalk and bike lane thing and make it function as a network that serves the whole community. So I think that is helpful to us, even though, you know, we're not, I think we really mean like, okay, great, like we won't do bike lanes because people aren't running on the streets. It's more a way of us understanding the sort of the brackets of the issue.
See like a lot of opportunities for bike. I mean, it's a difficult community to implement a lot of biking because of geography. There aren't a lot of streets that like are enjoyable to bike on.
You have a name.
Right.
Like have exploded.
Yeah.
Then it's
Along those lines of the bike lanes, I was curious about the sidewalk gap question. Were there any follow-up questions from the citizens of where the gaps are being viewed? Because I can easily see someone say, yeah, let's fill in the gaps until it takes up part of your front yard. And then it's, you know, not in my front yard situation. So I wasn't sure if there was any detail of where these gaps were occurring, or is it just like a general statement?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we had a comprehensive understanding of where every gap is, but we received many, like maybe hundreds of comments identifying specific desires for sidewalks.
I'd be curious.
Similar to the bike lane question, do you support it if it takes up part of your grass?
Yeah, right.
It's a front, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and I know that is one thing that has been very popular on the mapping tool as well, as people kind of specifically saying like, we should have a sidewalk here, we should have a sidewalk here, or, you know, because I know you live in my neighborhood, Dave, you know, going down Sleepy Hollow, there's that 2-house gap where there's, you know, there's a sidewalk, it stops for 2 houses and then it starts again. It's like, this would be nice to fill in, you know, going down the hill to the park. And some other ones throughout the community like that. And I think one of the things that Jenny and I have been talking about as we get into the next phase of the project is, you know, in our GIS, we have a map of all the sidewalks in the municipality. We also have maps of like the safe walking routes to school. We have layers for where the parks are. So trying to connect, you know, an overlay, okay, this is our existing sidewalk network, and these are, you know, the destinations that people are going to. These are sort of the designated safe routes to school. These are the parks and library and, you know, the places that people are walking to. So where sort of within that are we missing things? And maybe that becomes our sort of tier 1 priority of let's focus on these areas first. Back in 2013, the municipality adopted a sidewalk expansion policy. It's been used a couple times to install new sidewalks. And basically the way it reads is if a neighborhood wants sidewalks installed, they file a petition with the municipality. And then there's a financial cost sharing between the residents and the municipality. Depending on how busy the street is, the municipality contributes more. So like if it's an arterial street versus a, you know, local street, there's a cost sharing calculation in there. But I know there have been a couple instances where the bottom part of Sleepy Hollow, for instance, they filed a petition and, you know, we got to kind of the neighborhood meeting stage and everyone on the street liked the idea of a sidewalk. But to your point, the people on this side wanted it on the other side and the people on the other side didn't want it, you know, wanted it on the other. So it was kind of a back and forth and nothing ever kind of happened because no one could agree to have it on their side of the street. But, you know, I think as we get into, like Breen mentioned, adopting the complete streets policy, which part of that is what really triggers the complete streets policy is when we go in to repave a roadway, kind of looking at everything holistically. So then, you know, maybe when we go into repave roadways, we start to look at, hey, is this an area sort of designated for consideration for sidewalk expansion too? And that just becomes part of the overall program of, you know, the municipality comes in and says, hey, we're paving the road, we're gonna put sidewalks in. Obviously, there's a big cost number to that. The commission would have to consider that as part of the budgeting process, but you know, maybe that's one of the recommendations of the plan to kind of piggyback on the complete streets idea and expanding the sidewalk network and things like that.
So as we move into test phase, one thing that we would like to do is convene 3 appointed work groups to drill down on some of these major issue categories. The way we're thinking of it now, and I would be interested in any comments you have, would be to organize them in terms of mobility and access being one group, economic development and sustainability, and then community engagement. Each of those considering a combination of those topics that are rising to the surface. Given what you've heard this evening, is there anything you especially want to ensure that we account for or consider as we start test phase and exploring solutions?
Question.
I know, sorry.
Meaning like within the groups to make sure that we're hitting all the major topics? Is that what
Yeah,
you're-
is there anything that came through in the results or otherwise that you think really needs to be an important part of our conversations during the next phase?
I mean, which one of these, of the 3 yellow ones, do you think like the rec? Because that seemed like a high priority, whether it was the dog park or whatever. Which
It
one do you
is.
think that one kind of falls into? Is that?
I can't imagine, so given all of the work municipality has just completed on its parks system, I can't imagine that we are going to direct our focus group to spend a lot of time exploring solutions in as much as the strategies exist. So I think what we've received in the results is like a full speed ahead endorsement of what's already happening. Of course, the comprehensive plan will have recommendations related to parks and recreation for the next 10 years. I don't know that we have like assigned specifically that category to any of these.
Yeah, and I think we said it may fall somewhat under economic development, sustainability, you know, with regards to parks assets, and then somewhat under community engagement, just because of, you know, engaging the community. Our rec department is one of our big means of, you know, engaging people with their local government, even though they may not think about like, oh, hey, I'm in the soccer program, I'm engaging with my local government, but it is a program that we put on. And then also with the mobility and access portion that, you know, parks are one of the key locations that people go to. And we heard that when we did the Parks Master Plan last year, was that I think of the survey responses, we asked like, what are the major park, or what are the, you know, 2 or 3 most visited parks that you have. So we kind of have good data on where people go the most, but also how do you get to parks? I think like 53% of people said that they walk there more often than drive. And it was like 47 and 46% said that they drive there. So, you know, I think thinking about parks from a mobility and access standpoint is also important. But to echo what Jenny said, we, you know, have a parks master plan that we adopted earlier this year that has 180 different recommendations for us to go through. So I think this is a good reinforcement that people do care a lot about our parks and rec system and really want us to move forward with implementing those recommendations as well.
Yeah, we're going to ask our groups to grapple with the real tough issues. So it's easy as consultants to come in with a set of best practices based on what we understand the community's needs to be. But we really need local voices and local perspectives to inform the way that we frame solutions to these issues and what strategies would be appropriate here. So yeah, there's a lot to cover and directing the efforts will be no small task. So we want to make sure that the groups address everything that the public has identified as being important, with some emphasis on the problems that'll be, I think, most challenging to solve.
Yeah, like on the issue of sustainability, some of these questions are pretty open-ended about what does it mean to be innovators? What does it mean to be leaders among your peer communities? You know, those are all rather nebulous statements that need to have some meat to put on them.
if you don't mind me jumping in, I can give you a kind of concrete example on the being a leader that one of the things that we just talked about in our budget meeting on Saturday was that we are currently in discussions with the Borough of Dormont about taking over some of their, I'll say, finance functions. So, you know, Mount Lebanon is much larger than Dormont is. We have a much larger finance department. Dormont had some turnover with their bookkeeping or bookkeeper and was looking at, you know, potential solutions for, do we hire someone new? Do we outsource this to a third party? And we were talking with them and said, hey, you know, like, we have the capacity to take this on. You know, we'll charge you whatever, you know, an hourly rate for a part-time employee would be for us to do this. And then by hiring someone else for us, we also build our internal capacity to be able to do other things. And we're able to provide them a service at less cost for them and at a, you know, net zero cost for us. So I think that's something. We already have a you know, animal control cooperative where we house the animal control, you know, for more or less most of the South Hills, and different communities participate in it. Everybody pays into it in equal share so that, you know, there's a fair and equitable distribution, but everyone gets the services, but it's housed out of Mount Lebanon. We're the ones running it. So I think, you know, to me, at least, what does being a leader in, you know, at least the South Hills local governments mean? It kind of means when people are looking to regionalize or consolidate services or do cooperative services, that we're the ones stepping to the table and saying we can house that. We're the ones that can do that. You know, everybody can come to us. That you know, we are one of the large, well, population wise, we are the largest community in the South Hills. So we're kind of uniquely situated to take advantage of that and say, hey, you know, Dormont, Baldwin Township, Castle Shannon, Carnegie, you know, all these other little small communities that have less than 10,000 people, and we have almost 35,000, saying, hey, we have the capacity to be able to provide some services for you, you know, at less cost for you, at no cost to our taxpayers, but it'll overall be a better service to everybody. So at least to me, that's what.
I wonder, from the three groups that you have here, it seems like the economic development and state sustainability has the biggest task to me.
Perhaps.
Especially after looking at the map, because I did read a lot of the comments. It just seems like maybe those two together might be a lot, because like the mobility and access and the community engagement seem like much smaller work scopes than the big one in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to kind of come up with a scope for each of these,
Yeah.
sort out. Want to make sure each group has the bandwidth to advance each of these issues as far as we need them to go for the plan. Mm-hmm. That is a heavy lift.
The one other thing that we were thinking about too, in regards to these three groups, was the commission is currently discussing some realignment with their advisory board. So it won't affect the planning board at all because we're a state mandated board. But the municipality currently has 10 true advisory boards, not state mandated boards like us, but you know, looking at consolidating those 10 into 5. And as the commission's had multiple discussion session topics on this, and as we were talking about, you know, what are work groups that we want to convene, we had the thought of, oh, well, if the commission's going to be forming advisory boards around mobility and access, and on basically on these three were 3 of the 5, and the other 2 were Parks and Rec was a 4th one, and financial management was the 5th one that the commission was thinking about. So we kind of said, okay, we have the whole Parks Master Plan that'll kind of be the guiding document for the Parks and Rec board. So looking at 3 of the other 4 to potentially start to think about how that informs the comp plan, because then if the comp plan informs the work that the advisory boards are doing moving into the future, that layers very nicely upon itself.
Otherwise, in terms of next steps, we are presenting a similar update to the commissioners next week. And then we are working on getting all of this information back out to the community. So providing the update, reporting back, here are the survey results, here's what we heard from you. And then starting again that 2-way feedback loop. So all of that will be on the website. We want to present it in an engaging, kind of interesting way, keep people engaged. We have a very large email blast list. So once the website update is ready, we'll push that out and make sure everybody's aware. Yeah, and then we continue forward boldly on into test phase following the holidays. We'd like to keep you engaged. Please feel free to be in touch via Ian or directly. If you have further suggestions, we'd like to keep you engaged throughout the process.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
That will move on to citizen comments. The board will now accept public comments related to any items not appearing on the agenda. Do we have any citizen comments tonight?
If anyone on Zoom wants to make a comment, please use the raise hand function. We do have a few people on Zoom, so that's okay. It seems we have no online comments either. Oh, we have one. Okay, Chuck, you are unmuted and you can make your comment.
Good evening. Hi, this is Chuck Blumenshine, 905 Root Street, over by Jefferson. What I heard tonight was Ian, I may not have wrote it down completely correctly, but basically this is part of a land use plan update. And also heard that a lot of people are commenting about development reflecting the historic nature of the community where the development would occur. And I'm not sure how that comment of land use planning and the historic nature of the development ties into the 3 bullets that were shown on the screen. Does that fall under the economic development? Or it seems like to me that, allowing developments to happen in certain areas that don't reflect the historic area of the community are very problematic. So I just want to make sure I understand that. And one other general comment, I only found out about this website by accident by communicating with Ian. And the fact that you've got less than probably 1% of the population so far participating in this program seems to me like that's not a very representative number. So something I think needs to be done to get more people engaged to respond, whether you send out postcards or something to people to say, hey, this is what's happening. I don't think the community outreach is strong enough right now. That's the end of my comments.
Great, thank you. Anybody else, Ian?
That appears to be all.
Okay. With that, our next meeting, the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Mount Lebanon Planning Board is Tuesday, December 20th, 2022 at 7 p.m. Due to the ongoing pandemic, some municipal meetings throughout 2022 may be conducted virtually. Please check meeting agendas for location and format details. All municipal meetings in 2022 will have a Zoom webinar component to enable residents to attend meetings virtually. I have a call to adjourn.
This is Dave Hornacek. I call to adjourn the meeting.
Andrew George, I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're adjourned. Thank you. It's a wonder can just like that. Has a big nice little crack on it here.
Somebody got a little overzealous.
Yeah.
When it was busy, you were like